The rain fell over the city of Muzutafu, while outside a small apartment near Dagobah Municipal Beach, Mitsuki stood with her son, Katsuki, in her arms, dressed in an all-white pajama. Together, they waited under an umbrella for the door to open. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a short woman with green hair, holding a freckled baby in her arms, who was wearing a Care Bear pajama, specifically Oopsie Bear. Mitsuki felt a wave of affection upon seeing the baby with green hair and freckles, his pajama emphasizing his cuteness, though she found it slightly ironic to see a green pajama with freckles on his little face. Mitsuki greeted the woman, Inko Midoriya. The baby in her arms curiously gazed at Katsuki while sucking his finger. Inko, Mitsuki greeted back, embracing Inko and, in the process, squishing both Izuku and Katsuki. Once they finished hugging, Mitsuki shook the umbrella and set it aside before stepping into the small apartment. The two mothers walked to the living room and sat on the couch. Inko looked down at Izuku in her arms and gently lifted his tiny hands, softly pulling his finger out of his mouth. Izuku, say hi to Katsuki, Inko said gently. Mitsuki smiled and carefully lifted Katsuki. Look, Katsuki, this is Izuku. Katsuki, the grumpy-looking blonde baby, stared at Izuku and reached out his tiny hands toward him. AWW, it looks like Katsuki likes Izuku, Mitsuki said in a tender tone. They should play together, Inko suggested. Yes, Mitsuki agreed. That way, they'll build a great friendship. Inko nodded and stood up, setting Izuku on the couch while moving the coffee table aside and spreading out a long rug. She then picked up Izuku and placed him on the rug, while Mitsuki did the same with Katsuki. I'd go get the toys, Inko said, heading deeper into the apartment. Minutes later, she returned with a big box of toys, which she placed beside the rug, before sitting down next to Mitsuki. Mitsuki and Inko handed their children small plushes. Katsuki, still grumpy, took his plushie with a rough movement and hugged it, sucking his thumb while frowning at Izuku. Oh, Katsuki, do you want to get closer to Izuku? Go ahead, don't be shy, Mitsuki said with a smile. Katsuki looked at her before letting out a whiny sound. Well then, Inko stood up. We'll leave you two alone. You seem a bit shy, Katsuki. Inko smiled and gently grabbed Mitsuki's sleeve, pulling her up. Katsuki, take care of Izuku, she added. Together, Inko and Mitsuki headed to the small kitchen, where they began chatting while preparing some recipes, keeping an eye on their children. Katsuki watched as Mitsuki walked away into the kitchen, then turned back to Izuku. His anger faded, replaced by curiosity, as his little eyes sparkled. Ah, Izuku babbled, confused as he noticed Katsuki staring at him. Katsuki clumsily got up and started crawling toward Izuku. Once he reached him, Katsuki began poking Izuku's chubby, rosy cheeks. From the kitchen, Mitsuki saw this and shouted, Katsuki, be gentle. She knew her son tended to be rough, even with other babies, so she worried about what he might do to Izuku. Katsuki let out a whiny sound and stomped his tiny foot, as if telling his mother to leave him alone. His mother chuckled. All right, just do whatever you want. Mitsuki turned back to Inko, whispering as they both giggled. Katsuki let out a huff and looked back at Izuku. Ha ha! He laughed while softly patting Izuku's cheeks, making the baby let out small whimpers. Ah! Izuku protested, pushing Katsuki away with a weak little slap. Katsuki fell backward but didn't cry. Instead, he kept laughing, now clapping his tiny hands. Noticing Katsuki had fallen, Izuku quickly crawled toward him, babbling incoherently as his big emerald eyes filled with tears. Inko saw this but suppressed a small giggle. Katsuki got up again, his face turning red from laughter, and suddenly hugged Izuku. Without warning, Katsuki planted a soft kiss on Izuku's cheek. MWA. Izuku seemed to blush, giggling and clapping his little hands. He leaned in and returned the kiss on Katsuki's cheek. Katsuki kept laughing, unaware that their mothers stood behind them, cameras in hand. The two babies separated and started playing with their plushes. Meanwhile, Inko and Mitsuki watched them secretly. As they were immersed in their plushie battle, Izuku suddenly dropped his toy, his gaze shifting to a xylophone sticking out of the toy box. Izuku babbled excitedly, crawling toward the box. When he got there, he clumsily stood on his tiny feet, his little legs trembling. However, he couldn't reach the large xylophone. Izuku plopped onto the floor, his eyes welling up with tears. Katsuki, who had been watching Izuku, huffed upon seeing that he couldn't reach the xylophone. Frustrated, he began crawling toward the box, pounding the floor in irritation. Once he reached it, he stood on his feet, his slightly stronger legs wobbling. He went on tiptoe, trying to grab the xylophone, but even at the perfect height to barely touch it, he still couldn't fully grasp it. Frustrated, Kotsuki seemed to mutter curses, though they were just incoherent babbles. Hearing this, Mitsuki and Inko turned their heads to check on their children. Quickly, the mothers rushed out of the kitchen to their respective sons. Inko picked up Izuku, soothing him by rubbing his back gently. Meanwhile, Mitsuki noticed the xylophone in the toy box. She picked it up and handed it to Kotsuki. The moment he received it, he immediately calmed down and started crawling toward Inko. Kotsuki began hitting Inko's legs, demanding that she let go of Izuku, who was still sniffling. Alarmed by the small blows, Inko forced a smile. "Oh, Kotsuki, could you stop hitting me?" she asked, a trace of nervousness in her voice. Mitsuki, also alarmed, quickly lifted Kotsuki, trying to gently take the xylophone from him. "I am so sorry, Inko," Mitsuki apologized. "Kotsuki can be a little too aggressive sometimes." Inko smiled softly. "Don't worry." As Mitsuki struggled to take the xylophone from Kotsuki, Izuku's sobs ceased. His gaze shifted toward Kotsuki. "Ha ha." Izuku laughed, catching the attention of both his mother and Kotsuki. "Oh, Izuku, you seem calm now," his mother said, smiling as she adjusted him in her arms. Kotsuki, surprised and curious, loosened his grip on the xylophone while looking at Izuku. He turned back to his mother, pointing at Izuku while bouncing in Mitsuki's arms. "Yes, Kotsuki, they're cleaning Izuku up. But soon you'll play with him again," Mitsuki assured, tightening her grip to keep Kotsuki from falling while still holding the xylophone. Kotsuki seemed impatient, bouncing in his mother's arms, babbling while reaching out for Izuku. Noticing this, Inko finished cleaning Izuku's face and set him back on the soft rug. Mitsuki smiled, placing Kotsuki beside him and handing him the xylophone, which he aggressively grabbed. "Go on, have fun," Inko encouraged, though she worried since Izuku cried over the smallest things. "I wonder who he got that from." Kotsuki glanced at Mitsuki out of the corner of his eye as he crawled toward Izuku and handed him the xylophone. The small blonde baby sat next to Izuku and for a brief moment seemed to smile, but it was quickly replaced by his usual frown. Izuku received the xylophone with a smile and placed it on the floor before starting to hit it with his hands, filling the room with an unpleasant sound. However, Kotsuki, who didn't seem bothered by the noise at all, began laughing while clapping his tiny hands. Inko forced a smile as she covered her ears, along with Mitsuki. "Izuku, sweetheart, how about we try playing the xylophone with something more appropriate?" However, neither of the two babies seemed to pay her any attention. Desperate to stop the ear-piercing sound, Inko rushed to the toy box and, among the pile of toys, began searching for the xylophone stick. After nearly breaking a few toys, she finally found the precious stick. She quickly approached Izuku and gently held his tiny hands. "Izuku, sweetheart, why don't you try playing your xylophone with this stick?" Inko asked as she handed it to Izuku, who hesitantly accepted it. Inko released Izuku's hands so he could examine the object. She tried to ignore the way Kotsuki was staring at her. It was as if he could see into her soul. After inspecting the object Inko had given him, Izuku began hitting the xylophone with it. Inko and Mitsuki sighed in relief. They had finally gotten rid of the annoying, ear-splitting noise. The room filled with the sound of the xylophone and the laughter of the babies, especially Katsuki, who clapped his tiny hands while watching Izuku. Inko and Mitsuki joined in, clapping and smiling. Izuku's laughter grew louder, causing drool to dribble down his chin. Inko gently wiped his chin with a cloth, careful not to disturb him too much. The four of them continued laughing for several minutes until Izuku got tired and seemed to make a run for it. "Hey, sweetheart, where are you going?" Inko called out, running after the mischievous baby, trying to catch him. Seeing this, Katsuki looked at Mitsuki and gave her a mischievous grin before crawling off with Izuku. Mitsuki, alarmed, tried to grab Katsuki, but no matter how much she tried, the baby crawled even faster. The minutes seemed endless for the two mothers as they struggled to catch their two little troublemakers, who were playfully challenging them. Finally, Inko managed to catch Izuku. Smiling, she lifted him up and cradled him in her arms. "You can't escape from mommy," she said, laughing, making Izuku giggle.
Katsuki watched this and seemed to give up, letting Mitsuki scoop him up.
"You little brat," Mitsuki laughed as she started cradling him in her arms, though Katsuki seemed to struggle.
Mitsuki then began showering Katsuki with kisses.
Hey, the book and photos Mitsuki was holding were suddenly thrown aside by Katsuki. "Don't tell them about that, you old hag,"
Katsuki yelled, grabbing the book and clutching it to his chest, his face bright red, completely forgetting about the photos.
Inko and Izuku, who were in the living room at that moment listening to Mitsuki tell the story, smiled.
"Haken, it's okay. It's actually cute," Izuku said with a grin. Katsuki's blush deepened. He was mortified. Mitsuki smirked and held up the photos. "Here's Katsuki giving Izuku a kiss on the cheek," she said, showing them to Inko, who received them with great fondness.
Izuku blushed. "No way,